Let's see if I could do this all right here. There we go. Let me go back to just a short thing with the Southwest Monarch study. It was actually started back in 2003 by Chris Klein, who was at Boyce Thompson Arboretum originally, and he stayed with the study till almost 2010. I joined around 2006, and we really were fortunate with the number of people that were involved in tagging. I will tell you today that over 22,000 monarchs have been tagged in this time span, and with over 350 people being the taggers. So we're very happy with the participation and the information we've learned, and you'll be seeing some of that tag that loops into the radio tagging overview that I think all of you know. I'm going to just breathe on some of this a little bit. I need to change my screen there so I could see everything better here. So that little reminder with the monarch life cycle that it progresses from an egg to a new butterfly in about a month, give or take, based on the temperatures. If it's colder, it's going to take significantly longer. That breeding monarchs live 2 to 6 weeks, and that fall migratory monarchs are usually not breeding and can live up to 7 months, sometimes up to 9 months, I think was the most recent number that we've heard. So just keep that in mind behind all the information we'll be talking about. I mentioned about the high number we've had tagged. Out of those numbers, 84 were recovered. Recovery is a monarch that has been tagged in another location, usually the California coast or in Mexico. Those numbers sound like our ratio of recoveries isn't that high, but if you tag at the right time, it really is. And it's really kind of amazing how we've been able to hone it in from this early tagging that took place almost around the year to see when was the time that we were going to get the most productivity of the monarch flight. And we also learned through tagging, because we encourage people to tag through the fall and winter, that several monarchs spend the winter in the lower deserts, and they are still flying 3 to 4 months after they've been tagged. So that was a finding that we wouldn't have known had we said only tag in the fall. And we're really happy to have been able to learn that. They appear to be non-breeding. And we also have another set that do breed. So they do a little bit of both in the lower desert regions. So when one of those recoveries comes in, we go back and look at the day that it was tagged. And we look up the sun angle for that day. And that's the angle of the sun at noon. Don't worry about remembering all this, but this is kind of what is underlying some of our decisions with radio tagging later. And on the map on the left, you can see our recoveries that went to California in the blue dots, and those that went to Mexico with the yellow diamond shape squares. And when we first started tagging for the first 15 years of the study, it was really unique that most of the monarchs that went to Mexico went in the last half of this graph, while those that went to California were early. And it was blue on top and red on the, yellow on the bottom. Had we stopped tagging, we never would have seen that that's not totally true, that it does blend together and it's no longer a significant finding. So our monarchs go to both California or Mexico throughout the entire migratory period. Between those dotted lines, those green lines are the predicted lines of peak migration by Dr. Chip Taylor et al., who published a paper on that recently. And we wanted to see what is happening out here in the Southwest. And as you can see, the heaviest density are right in that predicted time period. The graph on the right goes by state. So it breaks up that same information by state. Red is Arizona. We've been tagging here longer before we started tagging in Utah, Nevada, and the other states. Utah, we have to add a few of the triangles, which go right in the center of those from recent recoveries as well. But we're seeing that same pattern develop throughout the southwestern area. If we group them together by every 3 degree days, we see this nice curve that makes it much easier to predict when the peak migration of monarchs would come through. And we want to kind of mention this in the respect that it moves a little bit from year to year based on other factors. If there's really strong winds coming from the south, it's going to keep them your way before they start coming to the lower deserts. If there's storm fronts, they could actually sweep through a little early by a couple days, but it's usually within 3 or 4 days we start seeing this movement. The one thing that is the stopper is high excessive heat. And this last fall and the year before were both examples of that, where the temperatures were still like around 110 in the fall. And that kind of bottled up the migration from coming through a little bit. The really interesting thing with this, though, is monarchs that are tagged later are never seen as a recovery. Some of those we've seen, as I mentioned, spending the winter down here in those time frames during the winter months. But we don't ever get them as recoveries. So the latest so far we've had tagged monarch be recovered is around November 18th. Anything after that, we never get a recovery on. But we're continuing to tag after year to make sure this holds. So if we take what I just said into what it looks like on the calendar, this is a rough estimate of those days. The tagging window where there's recoveries can be quite wide, almost a month long, with the peak numbers mainly in these areas. But remember, they can start early, so we always encourage people to start tagging at least a month prior and continue through as long as you're seeing monarchs. So this actually, what sparked this question was Denise's recovery up in Cornville. Every year we keep saying, gosh, we wish we know what routes they take instead of these straight line recoveries. And when Denise's came through, being tagged in Cornville and ending up in the San Diego area, it kind of re-sparked that thought, because did this monarch spend the window in San Diego area? Maybe that's where it was the whole time. Or did it go down to Baja or to the western coast of Sonora? We don't know really where it spent that winter for sure, because it was spotted on March 20th, which is really kind of a late spring sighting. So that was kind of exciting. The monarch was alive, floating in someone's swimming pool, at which they pulled out of the pool and contacted us. So that kind of got us thinking again. And we have been following the progression of radio tags for many years. We know there were several trials going on, but they kept having the problem of using a battery, which was heavy, and they couldn't get them light enough when a monarch only weighs half a gram. So that was our challenge. We knew that a monarch only weighs about a half a gram in the east, that Western monarchs are thought to be smaller and lighter than that. And how can you attach a radio tag to a monarch to track its flight? And up until recently, all these radio tags were too heavy. So how can they be tracked? Well, cellular tracking technology developed a new what they call blue morpho radio tag that weighs only 0.06 of a gram. And it uses a solar panel instead of a battery that fits on the back abdomen of a monarch butterfly. And at Cape May, they tested blue morpho tags in 23 and 24, and they were able to track the radio tagged monarchs on a free app on their smartphones while they stayed in the region. And I'll be sharing that in the next slide or two. But then they were losing the signal as they migrated out of their area. So they had no way to follow up on that after that point. They didn't really know at that point what was happening. The cellular tracking technology developed a longer range tracking in addition to that. That could be affixed to Modus towers. It could be retrofitted with a sensor. And this could expand the range of detection to approximately 2 kilometers or more. And it would send that data back so the tagger could see where that would be seen. With the smartphones, you could see at most about a quarter mile. So this is much wider and it makes it easier. But there's a cost involved in doing this. And it can't be retrofitted to all Modus towers. There are also home backyard systems developed by cellular tracking called Terra. And there's also handheld scanners that could be used for detection of about 1 kilometer. So the challenge is to not only tag the monarch, but also to be able to have some sort of detection system set up afterwards. So this is the app, the Project Monarch app. It's free. It's available easily to add to your phone if you have a smartphone. This is what it looks like on the left. You could see you have to register with it just like you do most apps with your email and contact information. You can hit this launch button and it'll take you to another screen like this. And you just push this button of Start Scan. And this is what it looks like if there is a tagged monarch that has the blue morpho tag on it. You can see how it pops up and it'll tell you the number on the name of it, the number of detections it's had so far, and the latest date of that detection. And I'll show you the next screen of this as we progress through. But this is a name that you can add when you're deploying it. Each of the radio tags actually has a numerical number to it that stays with this tracking as well. We have found when we are with people, like when we were doing experiments with the community college, we let them name them. This here detection is actually from an experiment we ran this summer that we'll be able to share with you. So the history of these in the West is that there was a pilot test of 3 Monarch radio tagged in Vandenberg, California by a Xerces working group that was successful with tracking within the grove for 5 days at the end of not this winter, but last winter. They were hoping to do more this winter, but they felt that the monarch numbers were too low to be able to do this. This is how, when you receive multiple tags, they come in hanging, and you just have to cut the tags off. These are the radio tag. This is a solar panel, the antenna. And if you look at this monarch is wearing one. You could see the solar panel here with the antenna off its back. But despite the information that was available and the people we talked to who have very limited tagging of them, there were just so many questions we weren't comfortable with. We didn't know how long these tags would stay on because no one really had that information. No one had tested them that long. There was also the question of, could they mate with them? So say they made it to California or Mexico and they came back and it's spring migration, would that get in the way of their mating? We just really didn't know how long it would be. And we didn't even know how much Western monarchs really weighed. We looked through all the published papers on the weight of Western monarchs, and there was very, very little information available. So we decided to create a pilot study, and it has two phases to it. We wanted to determine the feasibility of using blue morpho radio tags in the desert in the Southwest region. So far, all the testing, which is limited, has been done in humid environments and temperatures that are more typical for coastal regions. Our weather conditions are far more extreme here and much drier with our low humidities that could affect, for example, the adhesive that's used to attach them. So we reviewed and developed guidelines for monarchs suitable to be radio tagged during this fall migration, beginning in October of 2024. We purchased 20 radio tags, 10 that would be tagged in the field, and 10 we would save for overwintering research at Desert Botanical Gardens. Monarchs were selected. We determined they needed to have excellent wing conditions, which would indicate to us that they're closer to freshly closed rather than worn. With a weight of 0.35 grams or above, to be able to carry the weight of the radio tag easily. We also decided to use one of our blue tags as well because we didn't know if that tag would stay on for a long period of time or not. So that would add another 0.01 to their weight. So they would have to be able to carry this load of 0.07 grams. So there was our first date, October 10th of 2024. We decided to work with Scottsdale Community College, and that was our first launch. Their mascot is called the Artichokes, and so they decided to call their tag monarchs RD1, RD2, etc., as many as we tagged there. And we were really excited at that first launch and very nervous, I must say. As I tell you how you attach these in the next couple of slides, you might see why. So you can see the first launch actually stayed by, 7 days. We were able to track this one for 7 days. It was in a riparian area. You could see in the center slide here, these little blue dots were all recording all the sightings where people were using the app and recording them. Dr. Ron Ratowski was with us, helping us along with this process, and he was able to get a picture of the first flight when this one flew to the nearby tree for a little while. And this was a couple days later in a mesquite tree. You could see the tag on the back, the reflection on their back. So it was always kind of fun to get out of your car and flick your app on and see if you were going to get a detection and when would you get a detection. So I'm trying to think, I think we tagged 9 at Scottsdale Community College over the next month. And again, we would weigh them, we would measure their wings, we put them through several steps that they had to pass. We were surprised that the number one thing is that monarchs that are nectaring during their migration actually, for Western monarchs, have really good weights. They say the typical weight is over about 0.5 gram in the East. Ours were almost always 0.5 gram. I think our highest weight was 8. We really had some chunky monarchs stopping in this riparian area where there was mist flower in bloom that they were filling up on. So this was probably our longest one. This was a wild monarch that was tagged at the Desert Botanical Garden. This is kind of funny in its own way because this is the tagging place. right outside the Monarch Pavilion at the Desert Botanical Garden. We tagged this one that was freshly closed with the staff. They let it go, and it flew right over here, and you could see where it was seen um, for I think it was 23 days. Yeah. So the interesting thing is this is the area that's for employees only. This is the public area. And this monarch just insisted in staying with the employees, even though it was tagged here and it rarely came over anywhere else, but it was always seen in that area. So, uh, but it was nice to be able to tag one. And now you can see this is a winter tagging. This was one that was released on December 5th and still seen to the 29th of that month for 24 days. So rather than migrating, it chose to stay in the area. There was no evidence of breeding from what the employee said, and that was right by some milkweed, which probably had a lot to do with the activities there. But it was just an interesting observation to have. And it also reinforced our seeing monarchs during the winter months that are stay in the area rather than migrate. So then the Desert Botanical Garden generously donated the use of their butterfly pavilion when not open to the public during the winter months for our winter research. So we decided our original plans were to have wild monarchs, but we had some concerns because, number one, the population was so low this year. But number two, once we take them into the pavilion, they're USDA buildings, and we cannot bring them back out. They have to live their life there. And we did not want to take any number like that in a low year out of the breeding population in the spring. So we purchased 50 farm-raised monarchs, and we put them into 4 groups of 10 to monitor the effects of wearing a blue morpho radio tag, and if the tag adhesive would adhere over time. We also looked to see if wearing a radio tag interfered with their flight in any way, or their longevity, or if males or female monarchs responded differently to wearing the radio tag. They came in glassine envelopes. We had to remove each one, record their weight, their sex, their wing length measurements. And then we created these 4 groups with comparable monarch weights. 10 would be radio tag monarchs with a blue tag. 10 would be monarchs who experienced the process to have a radio tag monarch tag applied, but they were not radio tagged. So we wanted to make sure the process itself didn't cause that problem. And 10 monarchs would have our blue Southwest Monarch Study paper tag, and then 10 would be our control. We would just use a Sharpie to mark them so we could account for them when we came in, but they had nothing else done with their wings or interfered with in any way. We learned that the attachment to put the radio tag takes about 6.5 minutes. And most of that is wait time, where you have to wait for the adhesive to solidify. We know that Xerces and other groups have used weights on their wings, and we just really weren't comfortable with that. Then we found someone who used the top of a hanger. We found a regular hanger wasn't heavy enough, but if you get the plastic coated ones and cut them, they work perfectly. And we could put this on them, open their wings with a glassine envelope, then use the other one to open it totally. And one on the bottom because they'd keep trying to put their abdomen up, which made it difficult for us to get the adhesive on. But the shape of this just sat on them and they wouldn't move. They would just lay perfectly still when we use this method. So here's a little bit of how we do it. You might be chuckling at what we use for the adhesive here. If you've ever worn false eyelashes, you might be familiar with this. not my thing, unfortunately, so this was all new to me. You can see the part that's the solar panel and the antenna. So what we needed to do first was put some of the lash adhesive in this area here that's in the blue box. So we'd go from white dot to white dot and down the white line. And that was to cover the solar panel when we eventually would put it on. But you know what? Not all Monarchs have this nice little blue box like this to find. So those first couple ones were a little bit of a learning process. Now it's pretty easy. Once you put the adhesive on, you have to wait 30 seconds for it to get tacky. Then you have to flip the solar panel over so you're using the back side and put it on the Monarch. And then it starts a timing of 6 minutes. So I'm sorry, 3.5 minutes for a total of the 6.5. So that's what took the longest to do. I know at Cape May, they hold the Monarchs frequently. We tried that process and found it was difficult to hold them still so everything could dry without them moving. This is just reiterating what we mentioned about how we would implement it because it was a USDA approved space and why we made the decisions we did. We started, because of it being that USDA space, we had to actually do the measuring and put the radio tags on in an adjoining room. So we had to almost have a little bit of an assembly line of putting their numbers through, do what we were doing, hand them to other researchers to put them in a mesh bag and walk them over immediately into the pavilion, let them go, monitor their flight, make sure they could fly easily throughout the area. So the process, and you can see the radio tags on these two here. 1 to 4 researchers monitor the Monarchs at least 2 hours every other day. I will tell you that more often than not, we were there every day because something would come up and would say, you know what, I want to see what that one's going to do tomorrow. So, but for the design of this, we said we will take the data from every other day and track that. We monitored the Monarchs that were present or flying. We identified them by the numbers they had on them or their tag number, and we recorded each one at each visit. So we had a data sheet that we would go and check off as we saw them. We also turned the app on, and we made a separate list of the detections of the radio tags. So not only seeing them, but making sure they were detectable during that entire process was important. As you can imagine, at the beginning of the experiment, when all of them were alive, it took longer to do than it was as they started dying over time. And this is our results of the experiment. The radio tag Monarchs was this blue line that you can see here. So this is on longevity. The number of surviving individuals we saw each day over time since we put them in. And you can see this is the radio tag, the blue. The orange was the radio tag process, but were not radio tagged. The blue tagged was the white. And am I reading this right on the bottom? I'm having a hard time seeing my screen here of what's listed here. Yeah, and the yellow is no tag, so that was our control. So you can see the differences in their levels. So after putting these through several studies to see if any of this was significant or not, there was no significant difference in monarch longevity in any of the 4 groups or within the sexes in each group. The lifetime of radio tag monarchs, the process-only monarchs, the discal wing paper tag monarchs, and the control were comparable to each other. So in a way, we're looking at that as negative data, but it's also telling us that there was nothing striking that was getting in the way of further testing with radio tags. For example, we do know that someone in another experiment use super glue to attach these to the monarchs. And those that were attached with super glue all died within 2 days. We didn't have that experience using the eyelash glue. We didn't see any other effect. Furthermore, there were no differences between genders. Their sexes, whether they were male or female together, made no difference, or neither of them had a shorter lifespan within the groups either. But we also had some incidental findings that we didn't expect to see, but were good to know. During the record heat wave we had in the Phoenix area in December, the radio tag monarchs were observed mating. So yes, monarchs can mate with radio tags successfully. However, I do want to say we only saw the males mating. That doesn't mean that the females wouldn't, but because of their position under the monarchs, sometimes it was difficult if they were on plants like you could see here. You could barely see the female underneath. I happen to know this one just because I saw just the male at first and picked it up and saw them mating. The radio tag adhesive did stay adhered to the abdomen for most of the monarchs, but for the entire duration. But 2 did fall off. And we were able to identify that because of the tag number on them. And you could see on the back of their abdomen that there was still some adhesive on there a little bit. Our sample size was really small, but there was no immediate lethal effect that occurred to prevent further testing safely of the blue morpho tags on monarchs. So we were excited to hear that. We were hoping to do another round, but we were unable to find any farm monarchs in January. So we were not able to do a second layer, but we already booked the Desert Botanical Garden Butterfly arena for next fall. So this question keeps coming up. So can a radio tag monarch reach the overwintering sites? And yeah, likely yes. And we were struggling until we remembered this recovery. A lot of times when we hear of a recovery, it could be like Denise's. We didn't know when that monarch appeared in the San Diego area. Most of ours we don't hear about until they actually do the counts. And it could be several months later or in the middle of winter before we hear of a monarch that's appearing in California or in Mexico. So we don't know how long their flight was. But this one gives us a hint. In 2016, a monarch was tagged in Wilcox, Arizona. It was freshly closed, and it was seen 19 days later at Joshua Tree National Park in California during a NABA count. That was a distance of 369 miles in 19 days. The radio tagged wild monarch that we used was detected for 23 days at Desert Botanical Gardens. So why every migration flight varies, the outlook future for success using these radio tags seems very positive that that will not be an issue for the migration flight. Right after that came this first long-range radio tag from Cape May, which was exciting to hear about. In December, a person in Florida with a backyard terrace system detected Lionel, but he knew it wasn't in his backyard. This monarch was not in his backyard. They eventually found it in nearby St. Augustine, Florida. It was originally tagged on November 2nd and flew 726 miles before detection. When you talk to the person who had this recovery, it was really kind of interesting because he had this backyard unit, but he couldn't find the Monarch, but he, was trying to make some sense of all this. And he kept having to walk through his neighborhood until finally he got the strongest signal and knocked on their door and said, guess what you have in your backyard, I think, and was able to find them. So as we get more ways to detect, we'll learn so much more. And that detection will be the key to our sightings. Modus towers with a 434 frequency can be outfitted with a sensor to detect the blue morpho radio tags, and that will extend that detection range so we can hear them in sight and start connecting the dots and learn more about where they are flying. The 434 is a blue model here, but don't get too worried here because most of these dual modes, if you hit these individually on a modus tower map, are blue and another frequency. So there's many more than we think there are. And we know that the Bureau of Reclamation just contacted us last week that along the Colorado River, they are outfitting their stations with the blue morpho sensor, which we were excited about, and they put us in touch with some of those in California as well who will be doing that. By next year and the year after, many of the Modus towers that will be put up that they received through a grant, and we're hoping those grants still go through with the changes in those decisions with nonprofits getting grants, are at the overwintering sites will also be going up, which will make detections even better. This is just the very early phase of learning more how to use these tags efficiently. And there's several projects currently in process here, and I'm excited to hear about the Northern Arizona Audubon supporting adding these sensors in your area. Desert River Audubon is covering a sensor at the Gilbert Riparian Park in the east part of the valley in the Phoenix area. And their city of Phoenix is adding one in Tres Rios to our southeast, which will all benefit us and more detections and learning more about this. It's very exciting to see people come along in so many different ways to help us along the way. So we hope to continue our radio tag research as the stumbling block for everyone is the cost. When we first purchased our first 20, they were $150. Oh, they were $125. They went up $50 to $175. So you could see that big jump up. And because we're a nonprofit and we don't receive any additional funding except donations, like so many people out there, so many organizations out there, where it's all this little balance of how do we get all these covered. And we're grateful for the people that have helped make that possible. This wouldn't be possible without the help of so many people. The Scottsdale Community College were great partners and continues to be. The Desert Botanical Gardens, Cape May Science Center, and Project Monarch work side by side to adapt some of the things with the tracking with us. The Xerces Society. We had many anonymous donors who stepped up, which was just amazing. And the other 300 dedicated Southwest Monarch Study Monarch taggers who set this all up by their tagging with paper tags throughout the Southwest over so many years. We just can't thank everyone enough. And you as well for listening to today. So we're so grateful you're here. So thank you for your time. And this is our information. If you have any questions outside when you get home today and you'd like to be in touch with us, if you'd like to tag, we highly encourage it in the fall in particular. But this year we are encouraging people to even tag in the spring. There are a lot of monarchs in the Phoenix area, and there's a lot. I just released several that he closed this week. I have more in my backyard, and many people have been coming in and telling us about what's in their yards as well. So thank you.